Hi, I'm Nicola from The People Mentor. Today I want to discuss something that many leaders feel but rarely admit out loud. Leadership can feel incredibly lonely. And I'm not talking about the obvious stuff, like making tough decisions or having fewer people to chat with at the coffee machine. I'm talking about that deeper isolation that creeps in when you constantly manage everyone else's emotions, solve everyone else's problems, and keep your struggles locked away. From the outside, it looks like you've got it all sorted. But inside, you're carrying way more than most people realise. The emotional weight of decisions that affect real people's lives. The pressure to always be the calm one, the fair one, the one with answers, even when you're barely holding it together yourself. If that's where you are right now, I want you to know something. You don't have to keep doing this alone. Wanting support isn't weakness. It's actually one of the smartest leadership decisions you'll ever make. So let's start by busting a massive myth that's probably been weighing you down. There's this idea floating around that strong leaders should be completely self-sufficient, that you should always know what to do, that the need for support or guidance is somehow a sign you're not cut out for the job. It's rubbish, honestly. And here's what's interesting. This myth contradicts everything we know about high-performance psychology. Studies show that leaders with regular peer support and coaching consistently make better decisions and report higher confidence in their leadership abilities. Think about every great leader you admire, and I mean really think about them. Churchill had his war cabinet. Steve Jobs had his inner circle. Oprah has her spiritual advisors. Even the most successful business leaders today, like Bill Gates and Richard Branson, have coaches, mentors, and trusted advisors. Not because they were incapable. They understood something many of us forget. Isolation doesn't make you stronger, it makes everything harder. There's actual neuroscience behind this. When we're isolated and under stress, our brains literally shut down the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for strategic thinking and emotional regulation. We go into threat mode, where we can only see problems, not solutions. A few things happen when you're trying to figure everything out on your own. First, you lose perspective. You get too close to problems to see them clearly. Second, the pressure amplifies because there's no one to share the cognitive load with. And third, and this is the big one, you start second-guessing your instincts because you've got no one to reality check your thinking. I learned this the hard way during my 33 years in management. I remember one ruthless period when I was managing 70 employees. I thought I had to have all the answers, handle every crisis, be the rock for everyone else. And you know what happened? I had a heart attack at 54. That was my wake-up call. It wasn't until I started building my support network, and I mean intentionally building it, that I became not just a surviving leader, but a truly effective one. Support isn't a luxury for leaders, it's a leadership tool, and it's time we started treating it that way. Here's the tricky thing about leadership isolation. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in gradually, and before you know it, you're carrying everything alone and wondering why leadership feels so bloody difficult. So let's talk about the quiet signs that you might be emotionally isolating yourself without even realizing it. I want to frame this using what I call the leadership isolation cycle, because understanding the pattern helps you break it. Phase 1, the withdrawal. You've stopped talking about work challenges with anyone who gets it. You might vent to your partner or friends, but they don't understand your specific pressures. So their advice, while well-meaning, doesn't quite hit the mark. You start thinking, what's the point? They don't understand anyway. Phase 2, the uniqueness trap. You feel like no one truly understands what you carry. This is where imposter syndrome's evil twin lives, what psychologists call role overload. You start believing that your challenges are so unique and complex that no one else could relate. You think, if they knew what I was dealing with, the decisions I have to make, the responsibility I carry, but you don't share it because you've convinced yourself you're the only one who can handle it. Phase 3, the decision paralysis. Without that trusted sounding board, you're constantly second-guessing your decisions. Every choice feels massive because you carry the full weight of analysis alone. In my experience working with leaders across different sectors, I've seen how isolation can turn even straightforward decisions into overwhelming dilemmas. Phase 4, the protector complex. You've convinced yourself that protecting your team means shouldering everything alone. You think, it's my job to handle the difficult stuff so they don't have to worry about it. But what you're actually doing is what psychologists call emotional hoarding. stockpiling stress and decision fatigue until you become less effective, not more protective. Phase 5, the silence. Finally, you can't remember when someone gave you space to discuss what's on your mind. Not to solve anything, not to get advice, just to process things out loud with someone who understands. This is when leaders tell me they feel like they're screaming into the void. Here's what I learned from managing through major organisational restructures. Isolation doesn't protect your team, but makes you a riskier leader. When you're isolated, you miss blind spots, overcomplicate decisions, and start operating from fear instead of strategy. If any of these phases hit home, it might be time to reassess how you approach leadership support. Because here's the thing, recognising the cycle is the first step to breaking it. This brings me to something I've developed over my years in leadership, your wisdom council. And no, this isn't some mystical concept, it's a practical framework I've refined after working with leaders and seeing what works. Your wisdom council isn't just about having people to call when everything's going wrong. It's about creating what I call a leadership operating system, a consistent rhythm of support that prevents problems from spiralling in the first place. Now, I learned this framework the hard way. During one of the most challenging periods of my career, managing an operational department while commuting long distances and dealing with my father dying, I realised I was trying to be everyone's solution without having anyone to turn to myself. That's when I developed what I now teach as my approach to building your wisdom council. First, look at diverse perspectives. You need 5 people who bring genuinely different viewpoints. Not just different personalities, but different industries, different leadership challenges, and different ways of seeing problems. I include someone from outside my sector, someone more senior than me, someone who's navigated similar challenges, and someone who challenges my thinking style. Next comes the intentional selection. This isn't about who's available or who you like having a coffee with. You're looking for people who aren't afraid to challenge your thinking, who know you well enough to spot your blind spots, and who can remind you what you stand for when you're feeling lost or overwhelmed. Think about structured engagement next. Here's where most people get it wrong. You don't wait for burnout or crisis to reach out. You build regular check-ins. Monthly is ideal, but even quarterly makes a massive difference. These aren't therapy sessions or endless venting calls. They're focused leadership conversations with a clear agenda. You're looking for conscious questions. In these check-ins, you're asking strategic questions. What's the real challenge behind my challenge? Where might I be holding too much that I could delegate or systematically address? What assumptions am I making that might need questioning? What would I advise someone else in my position? Let me share how this worked in practice. I remember working with a client, a director of a charity, who was struggling with a board member who seemed to undermine every initiative. She'd been going round in circles for months, getting more frustrated and less effective with each interaction. When she brought it to her wisdom council, one person asked her, "What if this board member's resistance is highlighting something important that you're missing?" Another asked, "What outcome do you want from this relationship, and how might your current approach prevent that?" Those questions shifted everything. Instead of seeing the board member as an obstacle, she started seeing them as someone with legitimate concerns who communicated differently. She adjusted her approach, and within 6 weeks, that same board member became one of her strongest advocates. But here's the key insight from my 33 years of experience. When you approach these conversations clearly about what you need, you get insights that can completely transform your perspective. It's not just about venting, it's about strategic thinking with people who can see what you can't. Now, I want to discuss something I call leadership intimacy. And before you worry, I'm not talking about anything inappropriate here. Leadership intimacy is a rare connection where you can speak freely without judgment, where the professional mask comes off for a moment, where you're not Director Sarah or Manager John. You're just you with all your uncertainties and concerns, and you're met with understanding rather than immediate solutions. If you've been leading for a while, you'll know how rare this is. But it's not impossible. It just requires choosing the right people and setting the right tone. Let me give you some examples of how to create this space. You might say something like, "Can I run something past you? I don't need you to solve it. I just need a safe space to think out loud." Or, "I'd value your perspective on this. I'm too close and need someone I trust to help me see it more clearly. Or even, I'm feeling a bit stuck with this situation. Would you mind if I talk through it with you? Sometimes I just need to process things with someone who gets the pressures of leadership. That's leadership intimacy. Not having to pretend you've got it all figured out. Not needing to be the strong one all the time. Just creating space to think, reflect, and sometimes simply feel heard. I'll tell you, some of my most valuable insights as a leader have come from these kinds of conversations. Not from formal training or management books, but from honest, vulnerable conversations with people I trust. I know what some of you might be thinking. This sounds great, Nicola, but I don't want to burden people. Everyone's busy. Everyone's got their problems. I get it. I really do. But here's the thing, that voice telling you you'll be a burden, that's often fear talking. Let me give you some practical scripts to help reframe your request for support. Try, I've realised I need to stop trying to figure everything out on my own. Would you be open to a regular check-in, maybe 30 minutes monthly, where we can bounce ideas off each other? I'd love to do the same for you if that would be helpful. Or, I trust your perspective, and I'm building a small circle of people I can check in with about leadership challenges. Would you be interested in being part of that? Nothing formal, just honest conversation. Or, I'm learning that isolation makes everything harder as a leader. I'd love to have someone I can talk to about challenges occasionally. You're someone whose judgment I respect. Would you be open to that? Notice how these scripts position the ask as a mutual benefit, not one-way support. Because here's the truth, most leaders are just as hungry for meaningful professional connection as you are. You'll be surprised how often the answer is yes. People want to help, especially when they understand precisely what you're asking for and how they can show up for you. Let me give you a detailed example of how this framework works in practice. I want you to see the before and after transformation. I worked with a manager, let's call her Emma, who was struggling with decision quicksand. Her team seemed to question every decision she made. She was spending hours second-guessing herself, and she'd started avoiding making any decisions that weren't necessary. Does this sound familiar? When we first spoke, she felt completely isolated. She was convinced that asking for help would make her look weak to her boss and ineffective to her team. Using the framework mentioned previously, we identified her wisdom counsel, a former colleague who'd successfully transitioned into management, her previous manager who she'd kept in touch with, and another department head in her current company who she respected but rarely spoke to about work challenges. Her first conversation was with the former colleague. She used one of the scripts I teach. I'm finding this transition to management tougher than I expected. Would you be open to a monthly coffee to discuss leadership challenges? I'd love to learn from your experience, and I'm happy to be a sounding board for you too. Not only did the colleague say yes, but she immediately said, "Oh, thank God, I thought I was the only one who struggled with this." She shared that she'd faced the same issue in her first management role. Team members who'd worked together for years and saw her as an outsider trying to change things. Here's what they worked through together. Emma realised she'd been making decisions in isolation and then announcing them, rather than involving her team where appropriate. She started using transparent decision-making, explaining not just what she'd decided, but also why and where their input had influenced her thinking. The transformation was remarkable. Emma went from avoiding decisions to looking forward to problem-solving with her team within 2 months. The questioning behaviours didn't disappear overnight, but they shifted from challenges to genuine curiosity and engagement. But the most crucial part is that Emma didn't just solve her immediate problem. She built a sustainable support system that continues to serve her leadership growth 2 years later. So here's what I want to leave you with today. You're not weak for needing support, you're wise. Loneliness isn't a character flaw, it's information. It's telling you something important about what you need to thrive as a leader. Leadership doesn't have to be lonely, but it requires you to intentionally build the connections and support systems that will sustain you. Start small. One conversation, one person, one honest admission that you don't have to figure it all out alone. Your future self and your team will thank you for it. If this has resonated with you and you're ready to stop carrying it all alone, I invite you to book a Conversation Catalyst session with me. This isn't just a chat, it's a structured session where we use my compass conversation model to tackle whatever's heavy on your shoulders. In this session, you'll experience what it's like to have someone in your corner who truly understands the complexity of leadership. We'll identify your specific isolation patterns, map out your ideal wisdom council, and create a practical action plan for building the support system you need. You'll walk away with clarity, perspective, and concrete next steps. No long commitment, just one powerful conversation that shows you what's possible when you stop trying to figure it all out alone. The link is below. Let's get you the support you've been giving to everyone else. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.